Guess what? One of the most hated, feared, and blamed garments in history was often worn willingly, comfortably, and for practical reasons. When worn properly, it didn't routinely crush organs. It didn't stop women from breathing. It didn't cause mass fainting epidemics. And it definitely wasn't invented by men twirling their mustaches and saying, "Yes, restrict her spleen." Corsets weren't torture devices. They were fashion. They were posture support. They were social signaling. They were technology. And like most things we oversimplify, the truth is far more interesting than the myth. This is Guess What?, where history gets tighter, stranger, and a lot less comfortable than you expected. Contrary to popular belief, corsets did not appear suddenly in the Victorian era. What we call a corset evolved over centuries from earlier structured garments designed to shape, support, or stiffen the torso. And when historians say corsets evolved over centuries, they mean that literally. If you dive back into the ancient world, you don't find corsets as we imagine them today, but you do find garments designed to shape, support, and control the torso. In ancient Greece, women wore garments like the strophion or mastodoton, bands of fabric wrapped tightly around the chest or underneath to provide support and shape, especially during physical activity. These weren't about shrinking the waist, but they clearly show an early understanding that the body could be shaped and stabilized with structured clothing. In the Roman world, similar garments existed, such as the fascia, a wrapped band worn around the torso or chest for support, posture, and modesty. Again, not waist-crushing devices, but unmistakably part of the same design lineage. Even earlier, in Minoan Crete, artwork depicts women wearing fitted bodices that emphasized the waist and supported the upper torso. While these garments weren't corsets in a technical sense, they demonstrate that shaping the torso with structured clothing was already culturally normal thousands of years before the Victorian era. As you move into the medieval period, this evolution becomes even clearer. Garments like the kirtle featured tightly fitted bodices laced to the body, distributing weight, supporting the chest, and shaping the torso. These were everyday clothes, not fashion extremes, and they functioned as both outerwear and structural support. By the late medieval and early modern period, these fitted bodices evolved into stays, which are widely recognized by historians as the direct ancestors of the corset. At that point, the lineage is undeniable. So the corset wasn't a sudden invention. It was the result of centuries of experimentation with structure, support, silhouette, and technology. What changed in the 19th century wasn't the idea of shaping the body. It was how extreme, visible, and controversial that shaping became in certain fashion circles. And when people forget that long history, they mistake a late fashion outlier for the entire past. For most wearers, corsets served a few very ordinary purposes: supporting heavy outer garments, creating a smooth, fashionable silhouette, improving posture by distributing weight across the torso, and acting as structural underwear in an era before elastic fabrics. They were custom-fitted far more often than modern bras or shoes, and that's a key detail people miss. A properly fitted corset was meant to be worn for long periods, often daily, which means if it caused constant pain or breathing restriction, people simply would not have worn it. Historical diaries, letters, and clothing records overwhelmingly describe corsets as normal, expected garments, not constant agony machines. Were there uncomfortable ones? Absolutely. Were there badly fitted ones? Of course. But that's true of footwear, armor, backpacks, and office chairs. Now let's address the elephant, or rather the twig, in the room. Tight lacing did exist. Some people, mostly adults with the time, money, and motivation, pursued extreme waist reduction. But here's the crucial part. It was never the norm. It was controversial even at the time. Doctors, fashion writers, and social commentators argued about it loudly. Which tells us something important. If everyone was doing it, no one would have been arguing. Most women did not tight lace. Most corsets were worn with modest shaping, not dramatic reduction. The iconic 16-inch waist? That was rare, exceptional, and often achieved temporarily for photographs or special events. Victorian Instagram was lying to you. Let's talk about the most persistent myth of all, that corsets routinely crushed internal organs into unnatural positions. Here's what medical historians agree on. There is no solid evidence that typical corset wear, when worn properly, caused widespread, permanent organ damage in the general population. Those dramatic diagrams you've seen, the ones where the liver is shoved into the pelvis and the lungs look like sad balloons, most were exaggerations, hypothetical warnings, or outright propaganda illustrations used in moral reform campaigns. That does not mean corsets had no health effects. As mentioned earlier, there was a subset of people who practiced extreme tight lacing. In those cases, rib compression could occur, breathing could be restricted while tightly laced, and discomfort was very real. Some medical commentary and later imaging even document physical compression in individuals who pursued extreme waist reduction. But that is the key distinction. Extreme tight lacing was not typical wear, nor was it widely advised even during the period when it was most visible. So the idea that millions of women were walking around with rearranged skeletons and collapsed organs? That's a myth. A popular one, a powerful one, but still a myth. Another thing we forget. Corsets were not exclusively worn by women. Men wore structured undergarments too, especially in certain periods, for posture, support, and fashionable shape. Military uniforms, formal wear, and aristocratic fashion all included structured torso garments. The idea that corsets were uniquely a tool of female oppression ignores how clothing enforced norms on everyone. Fashion has always been a negotiation between body, status, technology, and social expectation. Corsets weren't special in that regard. They were just better engineered. Corsets didn't disappear because people woke up. They faded because clothing styles changed, new fabrics appeared, elastic materials became practical, and social norms shifted toward mobility. World wars mattered. Industrial labor mattered. Sports and physical activity mattered. And here's the irony. As corsets declined, new beauty standards replaced them. Often no healthier, just less visible. High heels, restrictive bras, extreme dieting, Photoshop. The corset didn't invent body pressure. It just made it visible. Here's another myth that refuses to die. That corsets were designed for idle, fragile women who spent their days fainting onto velvet couches. That image ignores reality. Most women throughout history worked, physically, in homes, in fields, in shops, in factories, as servants, as laborers, and many of them wore corsets while doing it. Why? Because for many working women, Corsets provided support, not restriction. They helped distribute the weight of heavy skirts and layered clothing. They stabilized the torso during long hours of standing or lifting. Contrary to popular belief, maternity corsets existed by the 19th century, specifically designed to loosen, adjust, and support the changing body. Were all medical beliefs perfect? No. But the idea that pregnancy plus corsets automatically equaled cruelty or catastrophe is not supported by historical evidence. Misuse existed, but blanket horror stories do not reflect the norm. Victorian women fainting constantly is one of the most exaggerated tropes in pop history. Fainting did happen, but it was commonly linked to heat, illness, poor ventilation, crowded social spaces, or performative behavior shaped by social expectations. Medical literature does not support widespread corset-induced fainting. In many cases, fainting functioned as social theater, a culturally recognized expression of sensitivity or emotional overwhelm. Corsets became an easy scapegoat. It's easier to blame an object than examine a culture. Corsets became the perfect historical villain. They let us say, "Look how barbaric the past was," without even considering perspective. Corsets are easy to blame because they're tangible. You can point at them. You can't point at expectation. And history loves a villain more than it loves nuance. So no, corsets weren't medieval torture devices disguised as underwear. They were tools, sometimes misused, sometimes abused, mostly ordinary. Like most things in history, they're neither saints nor monsters, just human. That's today's episode of Guess What? If you enjoyed walking carefully through history with me, hit subscribe, because next time, who knows what we'll uncover? Until then, stay curious. And remember, the past wasn't stupid. It was just doing the best it could with what it had.